African News Review. I am your host, as usual, Adesoji Iginla, and with me is our good Comrade Milton Allimadi, editor of Black Star News and author of How Europe Was Demonized in the Western Media. Welcome, Comrade.
Karibu.
Yes.
Asante sana.
Yes, so African News Review, as we all know, is your regular program where we unpack African stories in the Western press and sort of bring clarity to the complex realities shaping the African continent. And without further ado, I will go into our first story, which is from the New York Times, and it reads, 4 Lessons for Trump. I would love to see what your thoughts are on the story. So it reads, 4 Lessons for Trump from Britain's failed Rwanda deportation deal. And it goes on. The lead says, the United States is said to be in talks with the African country about taking in expelled migrants. There may be lessons in London's experience, it says. And it goes on. On Sunday, Rwanda's foreign minister said his country was in early stage talks with the Trump administration about a deal to take in migrants deported from the United States. That news had a familiar ring in Britain, where the former conservative-led government agreed to a deal in 2022 to permanently deport asylum seekers to Rwanda, and then spent 2 years and hundreds of millions of pounds trying largely, fruitlessly, to make the plan happen. When Britain's highest court ruled that the process broke human rights law, the conservative government tried to use new legislation to override the judgment. In the end, the policy proved an almost complete failure, and the new Labour government, which was elected last year, scrapped it, citing its huge expense and unworkability. Your initial thoughts?
Well, it's very sad to see an African country having to prostitute itself in such a way. Because, and sadly, in the particular case of Rwanda has a history that is characterized by much violence and political upheaval, beginning immediately from independence, when the monarchy at that time, which had been a Tutsi monarchy, was overthrown by the majority Hutu population. And there was mass killings occasioned that revolution, and tens of thousands of Tutsi had to flee. They fled to Uganda primarily. They fled to Congo. They fled to Tanzania, and some fled to Kenya as well. So now, and they fled seeking what? Shelter and safety from the killings that were ongoing in Rwanda. So to see Rwanda today adopting such a policy where people, for whatever reason, are seeking sanctuary in other parts of the world. You discussed the case of people that were coming to the United Kingdom. And now we're discussing the case of people coming to the United States. So now for Rwanda to say that they would be willing to accept these people when these people did not seek to flee to Rwanda. Right? They made their own judgment to go to the UK or to go to the US, and then given Rwanda's own particular history, it does not get any more tragic and ironic than this. So that's my first observation. And then my second observation is this. This is slave trade in reverse. Now, people are being sold off to an African country. Let's think about that. That's what it is. No matter how you couch it, Rwanda is not taking these individuals for free.
Yeah.
Rwanda is not saying, oh, this is the safest place in the world. Why are you fleeing to the UK? Why are you going to the United States? Come here to Rwanda and we'll take care of you. And you live in peace and harmony. No, this is a commercial deal. So these two ironic observations are what I find most disturbing. Everything else is just details, minor details of minor interest compared to the context that I just provided.
I mean, you would get the chance to flesh out that context a little bit more in the sense that if we go further down the article, there is a part there that stood out. I mean, breaking in the lessons, if you take them one by one and sort of, explaining to our audience what one was the fact that it could be expensive. That's to the United States. The British government spent 715 million pounds. I repeat, 715 million pounds, about $955 million on the plan, which he claimed would deter illegal migration, as well as another 290 paid directly to the Rwandan government. Millions more went on preparing deportation flights, readying detention centers and IT systems, and paying for staff and legal costs. In the end, only four, I repeat, only 4 migrants ended up being sent to Rwanda, and they went voluntarily and were paid £3,000 each to do so. Your thoughts on that aspect? I know probably that would not play well in the US media.
No, absolutely not. And in fact, but I mean, the UK case was a bit complicated.
Yeah.
Because of the legal challenges, right?
Correct.
In this particular case, it's possible that people will just be loaded on military cargo planes or commercial planes and flown to Kigali by the United States.
Because the state is,
Since the current president, Trump, has shown that he's willing to defy the courts anyway, you see? So that's the difference. Now, in terms of the cost, isn't it true that Rwanda was paid about $300 million?
Correct.
All right. So, and 4 people went, right? That means it was $75 million per person, right?
Yeah.
That's what it costs the UK.
To deport.
You see? Right. So, all right, this is, here's the interesting thing. I think the Republicans are going to suffer such a resounding defeat in the midterm elections that a lot of the policies that we are seeing
will be
now being implemented, being discussed under President Trump, I think a lot of is going to be shelved in 2 years' time when they have midterm elections, because the midterm elections have generally been a good barometer, a good gauge of what is to come 2 years later when they have the presidential election. Yeah.
Okay.
Right.
Okay. I will go on, and the next one says, Rwanda probably can't take large numbers of deportees, which is the point you were making earlier. The Central African country is only about 10,000 square miles in size, about the same size as Massachusetts. The Trump administration has not disclosed how many people it might want to send to Rwanda, which is already one of the most densely populated nations. During the British Supreme Court hearing in 2023, a lawyer representing the government acknowledged that the number of asylum seekers that Rwanda could take was initially low and cited a need for capacity building in the country. Now, based on that alone, how is it that you want to then go and pour another sort of mix into an already chaotic situation?
Well, I personally think that if they go ahead and accept people, well, they will. They're negotiating for it, right?
Yeah, correct. Yeah.
And they're going to be receiving money. They would probably send some of the people to third-party countries. And in the case of Rwanda, they would most likely send them to neighboring Uganda, where you also have a very corrupt regime under General Museveni. And what might happen is, if you offer some of that money to Ugandan officials, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to accept some of these individuals, which of course raises the entire question. What really will happen to these individuals that are going to be deported to Rwanda?
Okay. So which leads me to the next point. Under an Israeli deal, migrants sent to Rwanda disappeared. An agreement with Washington should be the latest in a series of migration agreements struck by Rwanda. The African nation already hosts hundreds of African refugees from Libya who are awaiting resettlement under a deal agreed 6 years ago with the United Nations Refugee Agency and the African Union. The British treaty was never fully tested before being scrapped, but a secretive agreement signed with Israel in 2013 operated for 5 years before being ruled unlawful by the Israeli Supreme Court. Details of that agreement were discussed during the court's battle in Britain. Under the Israeli deal, Eritrean and Sudanese asylum seekers who had sought refuge in Israel were deported to Rwanda with explicit undertakings that their claim be considered and will enjoy humanitarian freedoms according to documents provided in evidence during the British court hearings. But the British justice found that Rwanda had not complied with those assurances and that asylum seekers deported by Israel were routinely moved clandestinely to Uganda by driven to the border and driven to the border or put on flights, which is what you said earlier.
Now, listen, regardless of what we just read, I think people just need to reflect more on this, right?
Yeah.
Kagame grew up in Uganda. Paul Kagame, General Paul Kagame, who is the ruler of Rwanda today.
Okay.
His family fled those massacres that I just mentioned at the time Rwanda became independent. Uganda did not say, okay, these families, we're going to ship them off to a third country, which country might have returned them back to Rwanda. And what knows what would have happened under those circumstances, you see? So when it comes to people seeking asylum, we should not be playing games with their lives. You know, this is very serious. And it's very shocking and ironic that you find an African country so desperate for diplomatic accommodation with the United States, desperate for sources of revenue so that the government can function, coming up with these elaborate schemes of, trading in human beings, reverse slavery to raise monies in order to function. It's a very sad state of affairs for an African country, specifically Rwanda, but for Africa in general as well,
Can I ask you to comment on the title of this piece in the New York Times? And the reason I say that is what drew my mind to it was, I hope I'm reading it wrong. When it says and I'll go back, when it says 4 lessons from Britain's failed Rwanda's deportation deal. Is this supposed to be a coaching manual
Well, you know what? And I'm glad you put it that way because, it really goes back to reinforce my point about reverse slavery, reverse slave trade. When Africans are commodified or non-Europeans are commodified, right?
Yeah.
A lot of the people that are going to be shipped off to Rwanda are going to be non-European people, right?
Of course.
So, if you want to learn how to be engaged in slave trade efficiently, then you do need a manual. And I'm glad you caught that. And these are the instructions and guidelines. A manual of how to engage in slavery efficiently based on lessons of the United Kingdom.
And it goes back to this thing that we keep putting out there week after week. Is the fact that history not only rhymes, it repeats itself.
All the time, especially if you are not informed of the history that our people have endured. You fail to see the repetition and you fail to capture the subtlety. But, that's the purpose of this platform. And I assure people that the more we interact with you, the much more efficient you're going to become in reading what they write. Because sometimes, here's a good thing. Sometimes the lack of empathy, whether it's racist, paternalistic, or what have you, is so deep-seated that they don't even realize it. They don't realize it. I'm not saying that exonerates them, right?
Yeah.
But the good thing is they don't realize it. So they write in a way that we can actually analyze and read their state of mind, or at least their attitude toward African people. You see?
Because, if you title a headline like that, 4 lessons, you're not saying, how inhumane the idea is that you're farming people out to a third country.
No, you're saying if you're going to do it,
this is how you should do
it. Right. But because it shows that they don't have anybody on their editorial staff who's willing to, and who would not be able to articulate what we're saying right now, you see?
Yeah.
And then say, you know what? There's a problem with this headline. And then they would say, why? And then you'd be able to explain to them. It shows you the kind of people that they have staffing an institution like that. But it's not specifically just them, so you can't hold them out.
Correct.
It's a very generalized lack of knowledge about Africa, lack of concern about Africa. Even the ones who think that they are progressive and enlightened, to a large measure, they actually are not. Because you have to go out of your way to know the true Africa, the true history of Africa. And that would then reorient your perception.
Yeah.
Exactly. Toward Africa, toward African history, and toward situations that Africans encounter in their daily existence, you see.
Okay. And so thank you for that. We go to our next story from the Financial Times, and it reads, wait a second. It's from the great country called Uganda.
Yes.
And it's anger in Uganda after leader's son claimed he abducted rival's bodyguard. The lead says crackdown on Bobi Wine and his supporters by military chief, seen as undermining stability in East Africa. And it goes on. President Yoweri Museveni's son, who is also Uganda's military chief, has sparked outrage by claiming responsibility for the detention of opposition leaders Bobi Wine's bodyguard and threatening to castrate him. In a string of posts, the General Muhwezi, who is often touted in a potential successor to his 80-year-old father, said he was holding Eddie Mutwe, Wine's bodyguard, in his basement, and he said they will be coming for the opposition leader himself next. He posted a picture of Moise undressed and with his beard shaved off. Go on.
No, go ahead.
Okay. I thought you wanted to say something. Bem second. And he continues. So it goes, Museveni initially presided over a long political economic recovery, with Uganda becoming a key Western ally, but soon developed into, the usual story. Bobby Wine, a former pop star whose original name is Robert Kusungweni, has been the main challenger in the 2021 elections. He himself has been jailed and beaten on many occasions. So, this is the latest salvo with regards to harassment and what have you. But why is this case very different?
All right. Well, I guess it's different because this is the chief bodyguard. And so you have this general, I call him the deputy dictator, admitting that I have him, I kidnapped him, and I am, and he also said, yes, she's tortured him.
Yes.
And, they say threatened to castrate him.
Yep.
But, people should not make the mistake to read this as erratic behavior by an individual who happens to be the son of the dictator and who is the commander of the Ugandan army.
Mm-hmm.
These are actions that are either initiated or at least authorized by Museveni himself. And what he's, in my assessment, what he's trying to do is trying to test the waters of how people will react when we come to next year's election, which is scheduled for sometime in January 2026. So he's testing the waters, see how supporters of Bobby Wine will react, how the international community will react, and how the population in general would react. These are precisely some of the measures that he is contemplating to execute next year. Either in terms of apprehending the key people around Bobby Wine, including his top security guy, like this individual, Eddie Mutwe, or how would people react if he were to lock Bobby Wine himself up as well. He's testing the ground. And it's very sad because it shows you how selfish this dictator really is. He doesn't care about his son at all. It's all about him all the time. And Ugandans talk about this all the time. Doesn't care about his son, doesn't care about his family. It's all about
him.
What is good for General Museveni. And why am I saying this? Even the sons of Saddam Hussein would never admit that they kidnapped, let alone tortured an individual. Just think about that carefully, right?
True.
Because once this individual, and that's where it's going to end up eventually, once this individual, General Muhwezi, ends up before a tribunal or the International Criminal Court, they don't even need witnesses. They're going to use his own words, right? To convict him. And this is not the first time that he's admitted. In many instances, he's admitted, he said this is what he wants to do. He's posted several occasions that he wants to behead Bobby Wine. If it was not for his father, Bobby Wine would be dead by now. So he's tweeted those kinds of tweets. But now he's saying, I actually kidnapped somebody.
Somebody, yeah.
And I actually tortured him.
Yeah.
And he's in my basement. You see, think about that. And yet he remains the commander of the National Army of Uganda. And his boss is his father, the commander-in-chief, General Yoweri Museveni. You see?
Okay. So you said there is going to be an election in January of 2026.
Correct.
Yoweri Museveni is in his 80s. Could it be, I shudder to say this, could it be a way of preparing for a dynastic rule handover? Because if the son is now
you can't hand over unless you have a military coup d'etat and it takes power that way. Because if you know, the only other way is for him to run, and nobody. Okay, so his father is already president. You see?
Yeah, correct.
And his father has been rigging elections, but it's different to rig from the incumbency. But for you who've never been president, which is his son, to come there and rig, there are some people who have benefited from his father's long rule, right?
Correct, correct.
So those people may want him to continue. So their benefits would continue. So those could vote for General Museveni. So he would get some votes. It would not be a zero, right?
Okay.
Even though Bobby Wine would still defeat him overwhelmingly, as Bobby Wine did in 2021. And General Museveni just refused to yield power.
Okay.
So I'm saying all this to suggest that nobody believes that anyone would vote for Muhoozi, who demonstrated not only cruelty, but erratic and almost insane behavior, you see? So it's very difficult to see how he can end up being in power in Uganda unless it's through a military coup d'etat. And that itself is a challenge for him because many elements in the military really detest him because they know he only became a general and commander of the army because of his father. One of the many qualified professional soldiers and generals in the army. So I don't even see how he would be able to sustain, even if he executes a coup d'etat and says, oh, I'm the president now, you know, like a palace sort of coup d'etat so he could take care of his father. I don't think that would be sustainable because there's so much opposition in the army.
It doesn't have that kind of clout. Okay.
Right.
Okay. Right. So one final question on the Ugandan position. Do you think the external powers can lean on the father to say enough is enough with regards to his reign?
Very possible.
Okay.
Very possible. They may not be able to prevent him from running because that's really the only way that we can preempt any possible mass bloodshed following the election. Because I think the young people have really had enough. If you were to rig another election, I think we would see, serious upheaval. So that would be the ideal way. That he not even run in the elections.
Okay.
I can't see him running and accepting defeat because that would be another possible way to cool things down. Run and say, okay, I've had a long run. I've had a long run. It seems that, the people have selected somebody else. And because
you think he's humble enough to accept that?
The key thing is he wants some assurance that there is no retribution against him and his family personally, right?
Okay.
So what would it take for there not to be retribution? You see? And that's the key question. it's very hard to see him, especially when his son continues doing this kind of behavior, which I believe would not happen if it's not authorized by the father himself. So when you're doing these type of atrocities, and you still want to say, okay, I'm willing to step down from politics and retire in my farm in Uganda and continue living in Uganda, you make it very difficult, you see? You make it very difficult.
Because
he's not shown the signs of a man who wants to pave the way for peaceful transition. You would not have these types of behaviors if that was what was going on in his mind. You see? So is he saying, and then, it's interesting, it reminds me of a remark that a US senator actually told me. He said, listen, we know Museveni wants to remain the ruler of Uganda, the president, because he thinks that's the only way he can protect himself, his family, and the ill-gotten wealth. This is what a US senator is saying. Think about it,
Oh, well. Well, I mean, what else is there to say? That's the usual dictator playbook. It's
right. Unless it's another possible scenario. And this guy that they sent to pave the way for negotiations between Rwanda
and
Congo, Bulus.
Yeah.
The father-in-law of Trump's daughter. Yeah. Right. Unless he says to Trump that, listen, because, this is a transactional presidency, right?
Yeah.
What's in it for us? If he says these deals could actually benefit us a lot, but this guy, because of the potential political instability in Uganda, could cause problems for these deals. So I think we need to squeeze this guy out of the picture. So if it comes from that, because it might jeopardize financial benefits to Trump or his administration.
Okay.
If Bulus couches it that way, that is another possibility. You see? Then they might be able to squeeze him sufficiently.
But Museveni will keep his head down, knowing fully well that might be the case.
And that is a problem. And that's the problem. At the end of the day, of course, he'll never be a Mandela. He'll never be a Nkrumah. He'll never be a Samora. Even a Kaunda. Even Mugabe, with his overstay in office, he's still way above Museveni in terms of his credentials for liberation war, the land reform, and all that. So he'll never be in that caliber of circles.
Yeah.
But at the same time, I'm not sure if he wants to be in the same caliber as a General Burhan in Sudan, or General Hemeti, the leader of the RSF in Sudan, or Siad Barre of Somalia. The country completely ruined because of his the aftermath of his overthrow. Does he want to be in those circles and discussed in the same way? I doubt it. So perhaps he may surprise people.
Wow.
Perhaps he may surprise you. Otherwise, of course, he'll end up being discussed in the same circles as Burhan, Hemeti, Siad Barre, and all those who have completely ruined and destroyed an African country.
Okay. Yeah. So speaking of ruin, someone's political career has been ruined, and for that story we stay with the Financial Times, and it reads, ex-Swiss chief Tijani Thiam vows to fight Ivory Coast electoral ban. It goes, Ivorian opposition leader and former Credit Suisse chief executive, Tijani Thiam, has said he would use every legal means to fight a ruling that has barred him from running for president later this year. A court in Ivory Coast commercial capital of Abidjan this week ruled Thiam, who returned to Ivorian politics in 2023 after leaving Credit Suisse following a corporate espionage scandal, should be struck off the electoral roll because he was a French citizen at the time of his registration. Thiam told the Financial Times that the decision was a travesty, accusing the ruling rally of Houphouët-Boigny's for democracy and peace, a campaign to orchestrate his removal from the electoral register and sideline him ahead of the October elections. Though the decision cannot be appealed, leaving Thiam with limited options in the courts. Now, there is a part here. Okay, yeah. Thiam has also called on Ivory Coast international stakeholders to support democracy in his country. The region is on a democratic evolution and not in a very good place, Thiam said. Another electoral crisis is in nobody's interest, regionally or internationally. What do you make of that? First, his candidature being, dismissed, and then the fact that he's now calling out on international stakeholders, whoever those are.
Right. And in the case of Ivory Coast, it makes sense because it's very well linked, hooked up to the Western capitalist system, you see?
Yeah, correct.
Even much more tightly than most African countries. So that explains the statement about the international stakeholders. Now, in terms of him being ruled ineligible, it is very ironic. I don't know, that it is uncommon for people in Ivory Coast to either identify or to see themselves as, or to actually be French citizens, right?
Yeah.
So to use that as something to disqualify him is completely preposterous, you see? And now, this is an individual who's been outside the country for a long time, right?
Yes.
But in the past, I think he had also been a part of the government in the past.
Correct.
So depending on the level of popularity that he has, I think we have not heard the last of this story. I don't think there's the end of the story. And then, of course, it's so ironic that the President Katara, is the one who is implementing something like this. This is the same individual who was initially barred from running for the presidency because he was accused of being a Burkinabe from Burkina Faso. And that actually led to the beginning of a civil war.
Civil war, yeah.
In the Ivory Coast.
So
now the same individual who went through that test of fire is now trying to start playing this game again.
Yes.
In the Ivory Coast. I mean, is it because he's 83 and some of his, faculty is now compromised? I can't understand it. Why risk something like that when you saw the consequences of what happened?
Correct.
When your citizenship was questioned, you see?
Yeah.
And you blame Laurent Gbagbo for that. You say he's, playing the ethnic card, causing instability, leading the country to war, and now you're doing the exact very same thing. And by the way, there are questions as to whether he should be president right now. You see, there's a whole question about whether the last time he ran, was he eligible to run, and now as a result, he's serving a third term in office.
Yeah.
Which is one of the main reasons why he also went to war with Gbagbo, and the French became involved because they were saying that Gbagbo, not only was he not recognizing outcome of an election, but he also did not believe in term limits.
Correct.
This is just, it's mind-boggling, to say the least.
That was why the story jumped out at me. Everything here that you accuse Thiam of being is projection. So in this case, we can say projection is actually a confession. One, you know, but
you're right. When it comes to the international stakeholders, they could make a difference.
Yeah.
And the international stakeholders, of course, when they say stakeholders, actually stakeholder. And that, of course, is France, right?
Yes.
So that, of course, is France. And if he's acceptable to France, if this challenger is acceptable to France, then we might see, even though they say the court ruling cannot be challenged, that may still not be the last word.
Correct.
You know, it may not be the last word in all of this. You know,
and so
Ivory Coast is so dependent, unlike, and the guy is also saying, you know, if you listen carefully to what you read, he's saying, given what we see happening in this region,
yes,
we don't want to go there. You see?
Yes.
We don't want to go there. So let's stick to the rules and allow me to run. And if I win, I win. He's saying all of those in a very well-packaged way, you see?
There's also something else that is there that, although you have to be conversant with the history of that region to be well aware of it, the path he followed in terms of his financial background, the fact that he's worked for companies outside of Cote d'Ivoire.
Yep, it's the same as Qatar.
It's the same, thank you very much. And the same as Silvio Olympio. Silvio Olympio is almost so for those who don't know, Silvio Olympio was the first prime minister of Togo. He was assassinated during a coup led by Yasigbe Eyadema, actually assassinated outside the United States Embassy. But I say that to say
no, actually, that was I think it's like a misinformation campaign to make the U.S. Seem less culpable. It subsequently came out. I'm not sure if it's in Susan Williams' book also, but it's somewhere out there, that he had actually made it inside the premises.
He was thrown out. Yeah, he was thrown out.
Yeah, exactly. He was
thrown out.
Right.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, you were
so
right.
they make it appear as if he failed to access.
Correct. Correct.
That's amazing.
Correct. Yeah. So it follows the same path as, hopefully he doesn't end up that way anyway, but it follows the same path as Silvio Olympio, because Silvio Olympio wanted a break. And the man is saying here that there's an evolution of democracy. So he's saying almost that the people yearn for something. Don't get in the way of it, because if you do, it's not going to be palatable for everyone. So again,
Ivory Coast would end up joining the alliance of Sahel states.
Yes. And will the French be, so when he was talking about international stakeholders,
he's giving them an alternative, right?
Yes.
I'm your best bet to prevent an Ibrahim Traore
from coming in here, exactly, and upsetting the cards. Yes, I might make some reforms that will cost you a few percentages on your interest rates, on your taxes, but I am not
precisely what he said.
Yes, but I am not as extreme as Ibrahim Traore, so
Absolutely.
let me get, So any final thoughts on that?
Oh, no, listen, we don't need any of the kind of upheaval, the civil war we saw in the Ivory Coast. I don't want any conflicts in African countries at all.
Okay.
None of us want to see that.
Correct.
Yeah, we want, the only conversation that I want young people to be involved in is, how do we erase these borders, man? How do we erase these borders so we can start realizing our potential as Africans, you know?
Yes. Because, I mean, there's the model that was copied, what part of the original plan that Nkrumah had, that was copied by the European Union, and has since been copied by nearly everyone except implemented by Africans themselves. But, you know, that's another conversation. Yeah, for our final, we've come to our final story, and we go to your favorite magazine, The Economists. And
you know, it's interesting. I'm glad you said my favorite magazine. Remember last year?
Yeah.
Most of my tweets, when in reference to The Economist, I was always attacking them for their anti-China bias.
Correct.
Every week, almost, or every other week, there's something China on the front, right? China. And, you know, I remember one tweet in particular, I said, you know what? With your anti-China bias, somebody might actually conclude that this is racist. It's always China, this, China, this, China, this. And whether China, and what would it be like? How China's advance in certain technology is jeopardizing Western security. Hello? So you're demonizing them for success in a certain field. Yeah. So you want them to fail, then you will not demonize them. Can you imagine? How can you attack somebody for success? Mind-boggling. But now, if you look at the most recent front cover of The Economist, the last 3 or 4, who are they attacking? It's Donald Trump. So it's so ironic, man. I think the last cover had the U.S., you know, the eagle, right?
Yeah.
The national bird, right? In bandage and with walking with crutches, you know.
With crutches, yeah. I mean,
so the irony I find so amazing and almost laughable, man.
But again, if you scratch the surface, it's not really critical. It's almost like we should not be going through what we accuse the other side of doing.
Precisely, and that's the point I'm making.
Yes, which is what the United States is reeling from now. It's that
exactly.
Somebody was saying it the other day, the United States now cannot stand on any moral ground and point that this is what should be done. Those days
and in the past,
gone.
And in the past, and the only difference is that Trump has revealed the hypocrisy.
Yes.
They could not stand on any moral ground in the past anyway.
Yeah.
But they had what they call plausible deniability.
And soft power.
But with Trump, you don't have plausible deniability. You know, you have no moral grounds to me when you went and you murdered Allende, when you went, you overthrew Arbenz in Guatemala, a democratically elected leader who's trying to implement land reform. You go to Iran, you get rid of Mossadegh. You go with Belgium to Congo, you know, Lumumba is murdered. Neo-colonialism fully implemented. You go to Ghana with the Pan-African trying to urge the continent to a United States of Africa. You have him overthrown. It's just, you know.
You come home, go to
But Trump
Grenada.
is making it explicit by not denying that this is what we do. You see,
yes,
that's the difference. Yes. That's the difference.
So yeah. Coming to this story, which is our final story, it leads why Ukraine is losing the war for African opinion. It cannot match Russia's historical ties, money, or propaganda. Last time I checked, Russia doesn't give Africa any money. Over the past 3 years, Ukraine has ceaselessly lobbied around the world for support in its fight against Russia. In few places have this effort been less successful than in Africa. The Ukrainian government has established new embassies, dispatched high-level delegations, and donated vast quantities of grains to the continent. That part alone, can you speak to that alone?
Yes, thank you for asking that. It is really disgusting that Ukraine is donating grain to Africa. You know, there's just no excuse and no justification at all.
Correct.
And so when I read reference like that, this is when I'm very harsh and very critical on African
governments,
rulers. There should not be any circumstance where Africa should be receiving
food aid
from Ukraine. It should be the other way.
Yeah.
It should be the other way around. So this level of failure is completely inexcusable. That alone, I think, in any African country is justification to get rid of any African leader. In any African country where the leadership is not able to feed the population, that government should not be in place, pure and simple. That should be number one condition for every citizen of any African country. We can't feed the people. Why? Think about that. To be fed is the number one condition, a prerequisite for existence. Otherwise, you don't exist. So if the government cannot assure my existence, why should that be the government? You see?
Correct.
To be honest, that to me was the most interesting part of this article, actually. You know? It's something we've talked about numerous times. It's in neocolonialism.
Yeah.
The last stage of imperialism. I think it was on page 29. Nkrumah said, food independence. We need food independence. We need scale up our agriculture, produce enough food, feed all of our people. If you had done nothing else except feed all of our people, then I would say, okay, you've succeeded, given the history that we've seen over the last 60 years. You know?
Yes.
Ukraine. Look at the size of Ukraine. Look at the population of Ukraine. Now Ukraine is giving grain to African countries, and in return wants favorable political outcome out of that.
Yeah, feed them.
It has come to that.
Yeah, feed them.
No, my brother, this is quite serious.
Feed the hungry Africans.
This is very serious. Very serious. I hope our people see.
I mean, it's even in the first
paragraph. As how serious it really is. You know? We can actually change things in Africa, but we have to first change our minds, right? You know, and I hope people are watching what is going on in the alliance of Sahel states.
Yeah.
You know, forget about the leadership. You know, forget about the rulers. The rulers are not the ones who are driving the transformation. It's the people.
Yeah.
You see? Because if Traoré were to do like a U-turn and become like a neo-colonialist puppet, guess what?
He'll be checked.
The people would move him out.
Yeah.
The people are now supporting him massively because they see him as the representative of their aspirations.
And
what are those aspirations? The aspirations is to use our resources to build Africa, right?
Correct.
Not have Europeans, not have the French take advantage of that. You see? And to treat the citizens of an African country as your number one priority, not European interests as your priority. You see?
Correct.
And that's why leaders like him get support. So why am I saying this? I'm saying this because we need more of those types of leaders in each and every African country. And if your current leader does not come close to that, then it's time to work to get rid of those types of leaders, right? And support ones who espouse those aspirations within your own country. You see?
Correct. So I would read one more piece. There is, and okay. So he says, as Volodymyr Zelensky, Ukraine's president, arrives in South Africa for his first ever state visit on Africa on April 24th, changing that seemed more important than ever. Donald Trump is keen to improve America's relation with Russia and threatens to withdraw military support from Ukraine and is pressing it to accept a peace deal. Mr. Zelensky needs all the support he can get. Will he get any? Now, that's not the question for me. The question here is past experience is hardly encouraging. Ukraine's former foreign minister has little to show for his 4 official tours of the continent since the start of the war. And then he goes on, when the AU at last sent him an invitation earlier this year, the member states were not comfortable with it, said a former Ethiopian diplomat. The idea was subsequently scrapped. I wonder why. Now, this is one part here that also then jumped out. Why has Ukraine struggled to make diplomatic headway? For one thing, it lags behind Russia in terms of funding, leverage, and connections on the continent, said Samuel Ramazani, author of Russia in Africa. Lots of African governments, especially those in Southern Africa, have historical ties to Russia. The Soviet Union backed African liberation movements fighting against colonial rule. Independent Ukraine subsequently did little to nourish its own relationship through high-level diplomatic engagement. That significantly affected the attitude of several African leaders to it in the war. There is no record of a foreign minister visiting the continent before 2022, he added. One final part. Another challenge is what Devika Kavo of the Ukrainian Association of South Africa described as the asymmetry of the information war Russia is waging in Africa. The African Initiative, a Kremlin-linked media outlet, pushes pro-Russian narratives in the Sahel, an unstable part of the continent dominated by military regimes. It invites local journalists on press junkets to Russia-occupied Ukraine. In South Africa, Western diplomats reckon that members of the ruling party, the African National Congress, have been on Russian payroll.
All right. I mean, that last reference,
yes,
it could be true, could be not true. I mean, that is not very shocking given how ANC, this is not the ANC of Nelson Mandela. So, that's irrelevant to the story anyway, right?
Correct.
In the sense that, Africans cannot just be led like goats or like sheep.
That's the
right?
key word. Yeah, that's the key.
Africans follow and they know what's happening globally.
Correct.
Right?
They're well aware.
Correct. And it's true. The article is correct that Africa has a long history with the Russia, particularly when it was the Soviet Union. Soviet Union provided arms for the armed struggle, right?
Correct.
Against the white minority rule in Mozambique, in Angola, in what was Rhodesia, now Zimbabwe, and South Africa itself.
Correct.
And provided training. Many African commandos were trained in the Soviet Union,
Mm.
and provided scholarships, thousands of scholarships through the years.
Yep.
To Africans who trained in engineering, trained in medicine in the Soviet Union. So Ukraine can never compete with that historical legacy.
Mm.
And then, of course, the other thing is there was some accommodation in the last 3 years. Africans were willing to listen to what Ukraine had to say, right?
Correct.
And occasionally take a neutral position, and some even voted, right, with Ukraine. But that was primarily because Biden was president, right?
Yeah.
And Ukraine, supporting Ukraine militarily and financially was U.S. national policy under Biden. So, of course, that puts a lot of pressure on African countries as well.
Yes, yes.
Do I want to be seen as hostile to Biden/USA? No. So it made things difficult for them. But now, in fact, this story is a bit dated that The Economist is doing now. Now there's even less incentive. When it's clear, Africans saw, Donald Trump almost punch President Zelensky in the White House, right? So under those circumstances, why should any,
African country,
in fact, the cancellation that they talked about, I don't know when the invitation was. I don't think it's mentioned.
That was in 2023. 2023.
When was the invitation to the African Union?
It was served in 2023 to speak at the African Union in 2024, but was rescinded.
2024?
Yeah.
Okay, when was it canceled?
It was canceled immediately thereafter. The idea was scrapped once the government heard about it.
Okay, and now there's absolutely no chance, given that the U.S. is now taking the position that you must agree to a peace agreement with Russia, and you're not getting the land that Russia has seized. You're not getting it back.
Yeah.
And we're not going to support you joining NATO either.
Neither, exactly.
So Africa, what do you think Africans would do if they're following all that information?
Yeah, exactly.
Why should they support Ukraine's position at this point?
When your major benefactor has decided.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And let's not forget, I don't think Ukraine ever apologized for the anti-Black, anti-African racism that African students and African migrants experienced in Ukraine at the beginning of this war. And it shows you how weak many of them are, that they could not make this a national issue when their citizens are being mistreated like that. And also tells you, Western media never made that an issue at all as well.
Correct.
Africans, as far as they're concerned, were just meant and supposed to blindly support Ukraine and ignore and disregard the fact that there was anti-African, anti-Black racism being shown widely in Ukraine at that time.
I mean,
it's just amazing.
It's also insulting that you will put down the notion that Africans were abreast of the news, down to information, propaganda, and what have you. If you read,
that's why I said when you read that part, I said that's irrelevant to this at all.
Yeah,
it just shows you how I don't even know the right word to characterize the this reference in The Economist.
Yeah.
So we are told, go jump off the bridge. Okay, I'm ready. Where's the bridge? Go tie a rope around your neck and hang yourself. Okay.
Where's the rope?
Why did you do it? Why did you do it? Because Russian propaganda told me to do it.
I mean, the mind boggles. Again, it's one of the reasons why we do what we do here on a weekly basis. And what can I say? Every week, we never fail to be amazed with the level to which the letters that are put before us describes the African continent in words or even in nuances that just are laughable. You know, it's that you have this, we've been trapped in this kind of mind time that we can't think outside of that box. We've been colonized, so everything they say about us is the fact. Is, I mean, who are you to, question it? Because if the way you take after the BBC, the Economist on a weekly basis, they heeded, then most of these stories we probably will not get it. But again, going back to the story we ran, the first one, the 4 lessons that Trump can learn from the UK, it goes back to this is learned behavior, and they've decided who is going to check us. Who?
Well, here we are.
Exactly, which is why we do what we do.
We definitely will check them.
Yes. Again, we've come to the end of another episode of African News Review. If you like what you've heard so far, do like, share, subscribe. Share it with people that you know will find value in what it is we do here. And as always, I am most grateful to Comrade sparing his time. And Comrade, your last word?
Until victory.
Yes. And from me, I would continue to, here it's Mother's Day in the United States. I would reference Thomas Sankara, who said mothers are the leaders of revolution. So what else can we say? And happy Mother's Day out there. And from me, until next week, have a lovely week ahead and God bless.